Well, welcome everyone. We're hoping that we have some public participants here in our open house for Japanese beetle to talk about the eradication measures that the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food will be taking. Before we go too far, we have a determination letter that we need to read before the meeting. It helps us to explain to all of you why we are not holding this in person, and helps us meet our legal requirements as well for open and public meetings requirements. So I will begin with that. So the Japanese Beetle Decision and Action Committee determination. I, Robert Hogard, chairman of the Japanese Beetle Decision and Action Committee, have determined that the March 25th, 2021 meeting of the Japanese Beetle Decision and Action Committee will be held electronically without an anchor location. This determination is based on the following facts. Number one, Utah is currently dealing with COVID-19, which has been determined to be a pandemic. COVID-19 is extremely contagious and can be deadly to those who contract it, especially those of advanced age and underlying health conditions. Number two, the Department of Agriculture and Food offices are in Salt Lake County, which is currently in a high level of transmission. Number three, a vast majority of agency staff and the members of the board are teleworking to avoid unnecessary contact with others. Number four, the boardroom is insufficient to allow social distancing and reasonably safe accommodation of the board and the public. Number five, the board will use an electronic platform which allows interested parties to view the meeting, hear discussions, and provide written comment. And dated today and signed by me. So thank you for that, Chris. Glad we have the opportunity now to proceed.
Right.
We will go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention thank you so much for everybody for attending. Naturally, as Rob mentioned, naturally and under normal circumstances, we'd bring the open house to your community and have an in-person, more personable format where you can ask questions and address any concerns in person. However, our hope is that this virtual format provides the opportunity for you to do that in these different times. After our presentation this evening, we hope to answer any questions, and if we are unable to get to those questions during our time, then we will answer them prior to our treatment. So please leave your contact information with your comments so we can return our answer, or feel free to call me or the number on your mailer so that we can answer those questions, and feel free to call us anytime you'd like. We want to address all your questions, all your concerns that you may have. It is with your support that we will eradicate this devastating pest before it establishes in our great state. And so with that, we will begin our presentation.
All right, thank you. My name is Joey Caputo. I am the state survey entomologist. I work on the state's invasive insect and trapping program. I also work on the state's apiary program. And I want to thank everyone in attendance today. It is an honor to serve all of you, the citizens of Utah, and to protect our agricultural and natural resources. Please advance the slide. We're here tonight to talk about Japanese beetle. It is a strictly plant-feeding pest. It does not harm animals or people, but it can be very devastating to the plants that it eats. You may be wondering, why is Japanese beetle special? We have a lot of plant-feeding pests in the state. One of the reasons is that it is an invasive species. And invasive species are different than endemic species in that they tend to have few natural enemies that can suppress their populations. And the plants that they feed on tend to have few defenses. So this can make them very problematic. I'd like to go a little bit over the description of the pest so you know what it looks like. We encourage people who think they may have seen Japanese beetle to report it to the department. If you look at that picture on the left, you'll see an adult Japanese beetle. And please don't be misled by the picture. It is not actually that large. That picture makes it look like a Godzilla monster. And it is not even near that size. It's about ½ an inch. You'll notice that it has iridescent green head and thorax, burgundy wings, and you'll find 5 pair of white tufts of hair on each side. as well as a pair of white tufts of hair on the back end of the beetle. Once you've seen a reference specimen, or maybe you've seen Japanese beetle back east, it's pretty easy to identify it. There are a few native insects that look similar, but once you've seen the real thing, it's pretty easy to separate it. The immature stage is a white grub that lives underground, usually under irrigated turf. And these are much more difficult to identify because they are commonly mistaken with other white grubs, such as the May-June beetle. However, just so you're aware, when it's fully grown, it's about 1 inch in size, it's C-shaped, and it has a brown head. The damage that these pests cause, you'll see on the right. On the bottom right, you'll see some turf that has been fed on by Japanese beetle. The grub essentially feeds on turf roots. So it's not attacking above ground plant parts like the stems or the leaves. What results due to this feeding is similar to drought stress in some cases, because there's not water or nutrients going to the leaf blades. And so you'll get patchy dieback, yellowing of the grass, as well as with severe infestations, grass that rolls up like carpet. Basically, the beetle is feeding on the turf roots and doing so much damage in certain cases that it's separating the roots from the thatch, and so you can literally roll it up. Now, if you look on the upper right, you'll see damage that the adult causes to leaves. The adults can feed on leaves, flowers, and fruit. But the picture here is of a leaf, and you'll notice that it has a skeletonized appearance to the damage. What's creating the skeletonization is that the beetle is feeding on all the plant parts except the veins. And I will get to the host in a moment. But first, we did want to give a brief mention to the economic importance of this beetle. We do not have established populations of Japanese beetle in west of the Rocky Mountains. However, back east they do. And those states pay annually about $500 million in plant replacement costs, damage to the plants or fruit or vegetables, and pesticide expenses. So that's something that they have, that is a burden that these states have to bear every year, but Utah and other Western states do not. Go ahead and advance the slide. Here's a diagram of the insect's life cycle. We'll start with the adults that are above ground, and you can see they're feeding on the cartoon here, the cartoon plant they're feeding on. The male and female will mate, and the female will dig a few inches below irrigated turf to lay a handful of eggs. She will leave that hole and dig another one and repeat the process until 40 to 60 eggs have been laid. Not all of the eggs will become adults, but it does give you an idea of how quickly this plant pest's population can increase. In late August and early September, the eggs will hatch and the grubs will emerge and begin feeding on the turf roots. They will continue feeding and growing through late summer and early fall. Once late fall and early winter comes around, the grub will dig down below, usually about 8 inches, and it will remain dormant through the winter. In the new year, once the weather warms up, the grub will become active again and start feeding on the turf roots again. In May, it will pupate, basically transforming from a larvae to an adult. And then around June, they start to emerge and the life cycle continues. Our eradication strategy is to control the insect while it is subterranean in the larval stage. We have no plans to do any sprays on above ground plants, and that is because it can be very difficult to control Japanese beetle populations as adults. It's much easier to control them as larvae. Go ahead and advance the slide. So Japanese beetle is not a picky pest. It has over 300 known host plants that it feeds on, and many of these are popular plants that people like to grow here in Utah, as well as economically important ones. So in our herbaceous plants, we've just given a small sampling of things that people like to grow here, things like dahlias, clematis, hollyhocks, and roses. Roses are especially a susceptible host. It can be very difficult to keep roses healthy where Japanese beetle populations are. But it also attacks things like fruits and vegetables, grapes and sweet corn. Shade trees like maples, lindens, willows, and very alarmingly, fruit trees. This insect has the potential to do damage to our fruit growing industry in the state. Go ahead and advance the slide. If you'd like to know more about the plants that are susceptible to damage in Utah, you can find this fact sheet on our JB eradication webpage. Go ahead and advance the slide. So here's the Japanese beetle distribution in the United States. It was first detected in New Jersey in 1916, and it quickly moved to northeastern and southern states. By mid-century, it had moved to some Midwestern states, and it most recently was in Colorado in the 90s and Montana in the 2000s. Now you'll notice, though, that the states west of the Rocky Mountains are not infested, do not have established populations. And this is no coincidence. There are a few things that we can attribute this to. One are the Rocky Mountains themselves. This provides a large natural barrier where there is not host material that the Japanese beetle can thrive on. And this makes it so the beetle cannot move on its own. So the only way it will get to Western states is if it is moved artificially. And the most common ways that that happens is the beetle moving through either nursery stock, sod, or soil. So the Western states that are highlighted on the left that are either JB free or have gone through eradication, we have regulations in place to make sure that if any of those three things are moved to our state, sod, nursery stock, or soil, that they have to meet certain precautionary measures so that Japanese beetle does not come here. The other thing that Western states have going for them is that we have surveillance programs. So I'll get to show you a trap here in a moment. All of these states basically place Japanese beetle traps around their states with the idea of looking for the pest in case the quarantine measures that we put on all of these three commodities are breached. And then if we do find Japanese beetles, we try to identify them early and eradicate them quickly so they do not become established. So as previously noted, you'll see Oregon and Idaho in green. Idaho recently completed an eradication project of Japanese beetle in the Boise area, and Oregon is in the process of doing this. Now, I will note that the Japanese beetle populations that we found here in Utah are much smaller than in both of those states. So we have a great degree of confidence that we will be successful. Here in Utah, we've actually eradicated larger populations. So we believe this is in the interest of our state, the residents, the landscape managers, the park managers, the fruit growers, the vegetable growers. We want to make sure that they do not have to bear any of the economic burden that these other states do. Go ahead and advance the slide. Now, as I mentioned, I work on the state apiary program and I'm a beekeeper, and I think this is important to point out. This is not a connection I made myself, but you'll notice in the photo credit, this was taken by a person named Whitney Cranshaw. And he was basically the extension entomologist for Colorado State University. And I got the chance to talk to him years ago and see a presentation he had. And he took this photo because he wanted to demonstrate that both honey and native bees forage on some of the same plants that the Japanese beetle attacks. This is important for two reasons. One is that this potentially reduces forage for the bees, but also two, this creates a new potential opportunity or more opportunities for pesticide exposure to bees. People tend to have a see and spray approach to pest control. They see a beetle like Japanese beetle and they will spray it. They typically don't go through the trouble of learning the life cycle and attacking it at a life stage that is very effective. As I mentioned before, it's much more effective to attack the beetle when it's in the larval stage. And while it's in the larval stage, it's in turf which presents a much less hazard to bees because they don't forage as much on turf unless there's weeds present. So he pointed this out and noted that there were people basically in Colorado and the Denver area spraying plants and spraying flowers and potentially exposing bees. And this is not something that we want. We are, as a department, we're already trying to educate applicators and homeowners on the importance of not spraying plants in bloom. And if we have Japanese beetle, this will make that job much more difficult. Go ahead and advance the slide. This is a history of Japanese beetle in Utah. In 1993, we enacted our quarantine, and that's when our regulations on sod, nursery stock, and soil went into place. Go ahead and advance. 1996, our Japanese beetle detection program began. And then almost 10 years later, we did find our first Japanese beetle. Go ahead and advance. However, it wasn't our traps that found it. We did not place as many traps back then as we do now. It was actually a USU extension agent that brought it to our attention, and we ended up placing traps around the area where it was captured. And this just goes to show you how important it is that people know what Japanese beetle looks like, because while our trapping is robust and we try to get all over the state with it, as I'll show you in a moment, having people that know what these pests look like is very important as well. A year later, our eradication program in Orem City began. And go ahead and advance. It's actually by 2012, we had eliminated the beetle population, but we did not declare eradication until 2 years later. And the reason is we wanted to have 2 consecutive years of negative trapping data where we did not find any beetles until we were sufficiently sure that we had gotten rid of the beetles. In 2019, we detected 43 Japanese beetles between Salt Lake and Davis counties. We actually did stable isotope analysis on these beetles through the University of Utah, and it was determined that these beetles were not from Utah. So this is not related to the Orem City eradication at all. And in 2020, our second eradication project began. Go ahead and advance the slide. So I often get the question, how do we know where Japanese beetle actually is? How do we know it's in Centerville, and how do we not know that it's in, or how do we know it's not in St. George? How do we know it's in your neighborhood, but not the neighborhood 3 blocks down? Well, the way we know is with these Japanese beetle traps. So you'll see the upper part, well, the trap resembles kind of a mortar. Sometimes people think it looks like a little bomb. But the upper part basically has some fins. We put a lure on it, and the Japanese beetle flies into it. Once it hits that fin, it falls down into a funnel and ultimately gets caught in that catch jar at the bottom. Now, back east, they use these same traps, but in some cases, they'll replace the catch jar with a garbage bag. And that's because they will catch that many beetles. It will fill an entire garbage bag. So that just shows you how powerful these are as a detection method. But Utah's a big state. Go ahead and advance the slide. Geographically speaking, we have a huge state, right? So how do we know where it actually is without placing a whole bunch of traps? Well, one thing we have on our side is that Japanese beetle does not thrive in desert or in forests. It thrives in places where people grow the host materials that we like. So things like turf, bedding plants, fruits, and vegetables. So we target our trapping efforts basically where people are and where the host material is. However, we do not skip any counties. Go ahead and advance the slide. This graphical representation shows you how many traps we place in each county every year, even when we don't find a Japanese beetle. These traps are placed just as a matter of precaution, and it is a huge logistical effort. We bring on a seasonal crew, we have thousands of traps, and we deploy them all over the state, regardless of whether we find them or not, just as a surveillance. So we do have a great degree of confidence where they are and where they're not. And if you advance the slide, we can show you how we can hone in even further. When we do find a Japanese beetle, as represented by that red symbol in the middle, that's basically a trap that had detected a Japanese beetle, then we place what's called a delimiting grid. A delimiting grid is just a fancy word for high density trapping. So we will place 100 traps about 500 feet apart around the center of that trap location that found the Japanese beetle. Now, if we find additional beetles in that same trap, we don't need to do any further trapping because we can basically be confident that we know kind of the parcel where it came from. However, if we are to find a beetle in another trap that is in any direction away from that, we have to expand the grid in that direction. And we will continue to place traps until we get to the point where we are no longer catching new beetles outside of these delimiting grids. So as I mentioned, just as a precautionary measure, when we don't even find Japanese beetles, we place about 2,000 traps. Since these detections that we have found in recent years, we have been placing around 4,500 traps. Basically, the balance of those from the precautionary traps are delimiting traps, trying to really hone in where these infestations are so that we can target the pesticide applications in the most efficient and effective manner. So this is surveillance-based treatment. This is not a guess. We know where these are. And without further ado, I will pass the time over to Mark Hillier, who has been coordinating much of the eradication efforts on the pesticide end, and he is going to go over with you some of the detections and some of the planned spray areas.
All right, thank you, Joey. Like you said, my name is Mark Hillier. I'm a compliance specialist here at the Department of Agriculture and Food. I work with our nursery program, our quarantine program, help out with insects and phytosanitary exports. If you can go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about our eradication that we had last year and then where we're going to be eradicating this year. Our eradication last year, this was in Salt Lake County. We out by the intermodal hub near I-80, the International Center and a Roper Rail Yard here in Salt Lake and South Salt Lake City. This just shows the acreages that we treated, the gold stars are where we trap beetles, and you can see the outlined green turf areas that we treated there. If you can go to the next slide. Now here's some pictures of us around the golfed around golf course, some trailheads. We had pesticide compliance out, managing and supervising, making sure that all EPA and Department of Agriculture laws, the labels were followed, that the application was done in accordance with laws that are on the books. Next slide, please. And we did see a reduction in beetles. This was a zoomed out map showing where we caught beetles and where there were males and females caught in the traps. If you could advance to the next slide. We did see a 58% reduction in our beetle trapping from this summer after that application was applied. We're also seeing about an 80% reduction in acres that we're going to be treating in 2021, which shows us that the eradication efforts that we had were highly successful in Salt Lake County. So that was the one county that we did eradication in last year. Unfortunately, as you've probably seen, we have caught beetles in other areas and are looking to expand our application efforts in 2021. If you can go to the next slide, we're going to talk about treatment proposal areas. Again, we're going to do a second year of treatments in Salt Lake County. Like I said, we have about an 80% reduction in acres that we're going to be treating, but there were some detections still around the Roper Rail Yard and at the Granite School District building just off I-80 and State Street. As you can see those areas there around the Granite Technical Institute with Granite School District. If you can go to the next slide, please. We also have out of Bangerter and 1820 South and 4800 West in Salt Lake. Around 10 acres, 11.7 and 9.5 acres of irrigated turf at each of these locations. Next slide, please. And then this is the intermodal hub in Salt Lake City. Not a ton of turf out here, but there is about 2.7 acres around here of possible potential Japanese beetle habitat that we're proposing to do a second year of treatment. If you go on to the next slide, please, it'll show our Utah County detection areas. We detected beetles in Lehigh City and Provo City. As you can see, you know, the one male, one female in one trap, as well as another male here in Provo. And then up in Lehigh City, up near Traverse Mountain, above Cabela's and Adobe there in Lehigh. Next slide. Show some, this is more detailed maps of the turf areas in the around Franklin Elementary School, and again that residential area of Traverse Mountain and Lehigh. Next slide, please. Moving up into Davis County, we had captures. This is the zoomed out map of Kaysville and Centerville. In Centerville, you can see we caught a lot of beetles there, 31 males, 11 females in one location. That was our highest density trap in a single trapping area of beetles that were caught. The next slide will show kind of a zoomed in more. Oh, this is also some other areas. West Point City and Farmington. These were single beetle captures, and we don't have those areas as proposed spray areas. We're going to do more trapping and see if we can get some more data to better pinpoint where we can best apply the chemicals. So next slide, we'll show some more detailed areas around near Davis High School there in the Kaysville West, and then up in the Kaysville East off of Highway 89 there, and I believe the Davis Technical College is near that Kaysville East area. A lot more beetles caught in these areas. We are a little more honed in on where to spray in these areas. Next slide, please. This is Centerville. This is where we caught the majority of the beetles. They're near Centerville Elementary School. It's about 65 acres that we have proposed for treatment there. Next slide, please. And I think we're moving on now to the chemical, the pesticide that we've selected. And I'll turn it over to Chris for that part.
Right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Joey. I think I failed to introduce myself, and just for anybody taking notes or for their record, my name is Christopher Watson. I am the Insect Program Manager and State Entomologist for the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. And once again, thank you. So the chosen chemical for our application is a well-known chemical for grub treatment. It is a tool that has been used in a number of cases for eradication efforts, acelepryn. And the acelepryn is known as a reduced use pesticide. It's a non-restricted pesticide. It's known to have low toxicity to mammals, birds, bees, earthworms. In addition to all the natural labels and law requirements that will be followed by the pesticide applicating company, we plan to have our own use inspections from our pesticide enforcement here with the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. They will conduct their use inspections, assuring that everything's followed in accordance with the labels, laws, that we're meeting all of the required restrictions that would come of it. In addition to that, we have additional measures that we will do a training with basically the company that's been selected for pollinator protection for this those selected companies will receive that pollinator protection training just to assure that we're doing everything we can to protect the pollinators, the bees, and such, not spraying flowers, various things of that nature. In addition to that pollinator protection, we will be doing the outreach to our registered beekeepers to provide them information when we'll be there to apply the pesticide, if they want to remove their bees, if we can provide a screening material to keep their bees in while the application dries, as the re-entry period is just a matter of once it dries, the chemical and re-entry period is open. Next slide. And this is a picture that was taken by our our lab technician when she went to Iowa. And if you can see it there, this is kind of the consequences of inaction. This is what we're up against if we choose to do nothing, which choosing to do nothing is an option. That's probably the easy option. You know, that's the easy thing to do. However, the Utah Department of Agriculture is never interested in doing just the easy thing, but doing the right thing, and to protect our industry, to protect our stakeholders and producers. And so therefore, we want to prevent this from being our reality in the future. And this is just one example of some of the aggregation that the Japanese beetle does and attacks various plant materials and the way that it can impact our great state. Next slide. And that essentially concludes the UDAF portion of our presentation for this open house, and we will move on from here.
I'd like to thank Joey and Mark and Chris for their presentations and for the wisdom that they have and the efforts that they've put into this. We don't go into any of these things blindly. We put a lot of effort into this to ensure that we are choosing the most safe chemicals for people, for the environment, and the things that we need to watch out for and protect. And I'm grateful for them and for their presentations today. We'll now move on, and we'll have a presentation from Dr. Michael Weirda, who is an extension professor with USU, Utah State University. We'll let him introduce himself, and then we'll go from there. Dr. Weirda.
All right, thank you very much. I am going to get my share screen going. Does that look good?
Yes, it's up.
Okay. All right. So hello, my name is Michael Weirda. I am the director of the USU Pesticide Safety Education Program. Excuse me. To be clear, I am the pesticide safety guy. I am not the pro or anti-pesticide guy. My background is environmental or wildlife toxicology, hence my favorite picture of me with about a 9-week-old baby bald eagle on that slide right there. Something just so you guys know, you're on Facebook. USU also has a Facebook, or USU PSEP also has a Facebook page. So if you're looking to spice your Facebook feed up with some safety information, check us out. So the topic, as we all know, is beetle management and esalepryn. I will be discussing the safety overall, but more specifically, I'll cover a couple portions of the label, discuss the mode of action of the active ingredient, chlorotranniprol, and how it has low mammalian toxicity. So let's begin. First, it's already been noted, but please take a note that this is a general use insecticide, which means it can be bought and applied by anyone. Also, it's worth noting that there isn't a signal word on the label. Only products with very low toxicity can be packaged without signal words. So now let's look at the precautionary statements from the label. This product is hazardous to humans and domestic animals, says it right on the label. However, when used as directed, the product does not present a hazard to humans or domestic animals. So the suggested PPE is also listed on the label. It's the basic PPE. long sleeve shirts, long pants, and shoes plus socks. If I was the person applying this, I would consider wearing gloves, only because 90% of the applicator exposure is via their skin or dermally, and wearing a pair of gloves reduces that exposure by 90+%. This is, of course, assuming you're already wearing the basic PPE. A few things worth noting from the environmental hazards portions of the label. The product can be toxic to aquatic invertebrates, and it should not be applied directly to water. Additionally, it has properties and characteristics associated with chemicals detected in groundwater. You may also notice in the language on the slide, to reduce runoff potential, the applications should be avoided if there's rain forecasted in the next 48 hours. So with these things in mind, having professionals handle the application under the watchful eyes of UDAF compliance specialists should drastically reduce the potential or the probability of misapplication, and thus may avoid off-target movement or contamination altogether. Next, let's look at the IPM portion of the label. You'll note on that portion of the label, it states beneficial arthropods won't be harmed by the product and how their continued existence can actually benefit long-term pest control, which could ultimately mean less pesticides applied overall. Next, let's look at how the active ingredient actually does its job. First off, we all have a nervous system. By we, I mean us, the animals, the insects, and many others. To drastically simplify how a nervous system works, we can say it works by moving electrical charges. These charges exist in the forms of concentration potentials or pools of ions. Two common ions or two common cations found in the nervous system are calcium and sodium. These ion concentrations are passed through channels, through membranes in the nervous system, and they result in an action. Why do we go on this side biology tangent? Because escileprin, the active ingredient in escileprin, pardon me, targets the nervous system. So chlorotraniliprole opens a calcium channel which results in muscle contraction. So the channel opens, that pool of calcium ions move through the channel, i.e. the movement of the electrical charge, and this causes a muscle contraction. Without relief of the contraction or without the channel closing, which chlorotraniliprole doesn't allow, eventually paralysis and death will result from exposure to it, from insect exposure to it. Within the channel, the specific target of the chlorotraniliprole is what's called the rhinodyne receptor. More specifically than that, an insect-specific rhinodyne receptor, and more specifically than that, a chewing insect rhinodyne receptor. This specificity, pardon me, of the active ingredient allows for control of several orders of chewing insects while sparing those beneficial insects that are in the area during an application. The insect rhinodyne receptor and the chlorotraniliprole active ingredient act like a lock and key, respectively. Now, to be clear, rhinodyne receptors do exist in mammal muscle and brain tissues. In fact, there's 3 different versions of rhinodyne receptors found in our muscles and our brain tissues. However, the chlorotraniliprole key only opens the chewing insect rhinodyne receptor, hence the reduced mammalian toxicity of this active ingredient. So to sum up those few slides we just went through, Escitalopram has a low mammalian toxicity due to the specific target site of the active ingredient. It doesn't kill beneficial insects, which can help reduce overall pesticide usage. However, it is toxic to aquatic invertebrates, and groundwater contamination should be avoided. Thus, having professionals conduct applications is a great way to reduce, if not eliminate, any potential off-target movements. With that, that is the basic idea of how Escitalopram works and how we can work with it and try to stay safe. That's all that I have. So I'm going to stop sharing. And remember, I can do this. There you go.
Thank you, Dr. Werda. Appreciate that very much. We will now proceed to having some comments made by members of the Japanese Beetle Decision and Action Committee. And I'm just going to go down the list of people who will be presenting, and then they can add their titles and what they do with their various organizations as they go forward. So we will have, first we'll have Amanda Barth, and then we'll have Sharon Hari, then Jeff Rowley, Alan Davis, a statement by Bruce Cox that will be read, and then a statement also by Katie Wagner. We will go through that, and then we'll have one more presentation and then time for questions. So Amanda, will you please proceed?
Hi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try and get this going. All right, how's that look?
That's good. Can you expand it to full screen for your portion, or are you already there?
It is expanded to full screen. It's taken up my whole screen. Is it working for you?
Yeah, we just see a portion of it. So
Okay. I'll try again.
that's
I'll try this one more time.
We were seeing your presenter view, so you might need to toggle screens or something like that.
right.
I just have the one screen. Let's see. I will try one more time. I will just do this.
If you share the presenter screen, that will be fine too. Amanda.
How is this? How is that?
We can't see that.
Okay. Presenter mode it is. Okay.
That's all right. Just do the best you can. It'll work.
My apologies here. Okay.
Thank you for participating. We know that
Of course.
sometimes it's not as easy as we think it should be. So
Boy, you know. Okay. How does it look?
perfect. Thank you. Just right.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much for your patience. And thank you so much for having me. I am grateful to be able to weigh in on this program and its merits. My name is Amanda Barth. I am the coordinator for Utah's Rare Insect Conservation Program with the Division of Wildlife Resources. And I want to give a little perspective from insect conservation and how that is interpreted, how we interpret the Japanese Beetle Eradication Program. So just to offer a little bit of a background on the Rare Insect Conservation Program in Utah, we got this started in 2019 as a partnership with the DNR and with Utah State University. And our initial focus has been on getting the state out in front of species listings under the Endangered Species Act. So we do that by identifying critical habitat and species distribution for our species of concern. We want to get out in front of declines, and we use the information that we can gather to restore and preserve this habitat to ensure the species survival. One of the top priorities that we have in our program right now is the monarch butterfly, as well as a number of native bee species. So this program has been a success so far because of the partnerships through agencies, through state agencies and federal agencies, and with strong community support. So from the perspective of insect conservation, first of all, Utah is, it has this special distinction of being a bee hotspot. We have more bee species in Utah than anywhere else in North America, which is pretty special. We have at least 1,100 known species, and there are more probably to be described, especially described down in the desert regions. You probably know that many insect species are in decline, and many of those species are pollinators and beneficial insects, beneficial species, and many of those are ground nesting bees and wasps. And so that's why this is really of a special concern. Bumblebees, many solitary bee species, and parasitic wasps are ground nesting species. So that means that invasive species present a major challenge to insect conservation. And the primary reason for that is pesticide application and the threats that those pose to vulnerable pollinating insects. Non-target species can be affected by pesticide misuse and overuse, especially long-term applications and anything that is that has a high probability of lingering in the environment, of lingering in soil and water. And it's really difficult for invasive for treating established species, established invasive pests. It's really difficult to also protect these native vulnerable insects when the need for eradication of established pests is going to have to take priority. So that means that they face a significant risk for loss. So that means that for insect conservation's purposes in Utah, a quick targeted approach to Japanese beetle eradication is the ideal approach. Acelepryn is, as was already described, it acts on leaf-eating grubs and on caterpillars. And so if there is not great evidence to demonstrate that that this pesticide doesn't have a major impact on ground nesting bees, because most of the toxicity studies are done on honeybees. So we are pretty sure we use honeybees as a sort of a generic metric for bee health overall, and in testing pesticide impacts. But we don't really know what long-term applications would do to ground nesting bees and wasps. So better to not risk that. And because Japanese beetles are so tricky to get rid of, it's vital to tackle this now and try to minimize the collateral damage to any native and vulnerable species, and really isolate the impacts to target species. So overall, my main message is that Utah's native insects need our support. Here's an example, a variety of examples of native insects in Utah that are beneficial predators, beneficial pollinators. We want to protect our natural resources, and this is a really valuable way to do that. And with that, I will wrap up my presentation.
Thank you, Amanda. Erin?
Hi. Am I having a weird view?
Yes, you are.
Shoot.
Okay, you didn't there though, so
Okay,
maybe
perfect. Much better. Thank you.
Yep.
My name is Sharon Hari. I am the Urban Design Director for the City of South Salt Lake, and I'm responsible for management of parks and facilities. And we have quite a few parks in South Salt Lake, the majority of them east of I-15. There are also quite a few parks and open spaces west of I-15, but they're managed by Salt Lake County, including parks along the Jordan River. And they're also managed by Central Valley Central Valley Reclamation, which is where the Golf the Round site where the Japanese beetles have been found is located. So between all those areas with a significant amount of park grass and trees and native landscaping, we are highly interested in seeing any invasive pests like this removed for the sake of both those spaces that our public enjoys and also for the sake of their own yards and landscapes that we want to protect. We're an older city that has a significant amount of industrial and commercial, so our landscape areas are sort of concentrated in certain parts of the city, but nonetheless, we value every tree and every yard for what it does contribute to our city's green space. So this eradication effort that makes it possible for people to continue greening up their landscapes and adding landscaping over time, as well as continue putting in new landscaping as sites redevelop, because we have quite a few industrial sites in recent years that are turning into housing and into even transit-oriented development along the tracks lines. And we want to make sure that we still have the possibility to put in yards and so on. That happened about a mile south of the Central Valley in Roper Rail Yard area. We have a significant new residential development that's mixing in with some of the other residential developments in that area. And it's become a very popular new neighborhood. And we want to make sure we protect those neighborhoods in every chance we have to keep our urban forest and our home landscapes in good shape. That's all I really had to say about the city, but we as a city team that manages our spaces recognizes the importance of efforts like this and are grateful to the Utah Department of Agriculture for putting this effort out there, making us aware as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon. Jeff? Jeff, you're on mute.
That was awesome. That was just a test to see if you guys were watching. Hi, my name is Jeff Rowley. I am a tart cherry grower down here in Utah County, and I've been asked to talk a little bit about how it could impact the orchard growing and pretty much all the commercial growing down in Utah County or in the state of Utah. Right now, Utah is the second most tart cherry grower in the nation, producer in the nation, and we have, a lot of tart cherries here that we want to protect and keep away from harmful pests. On the one hand, when we have a pest come in, it can damage the trees, it can reduce production, but also it makes it so we have to spray more pesticides and to keep the populations down so we can have a good product. And right now we're fighting to keep those pesticides as low as possible because the standards for sales and the MRLs, which is the minimal residue level or maximum residue level, one of those, has to be met. And if we have to continue to use different pesticides, then that will make it so we won't be able to meet those. So I think it'd be a really good thing to be able to eradicate this as best as we can so that we can continue our awesome Utah horticulture and production of fruits, vegetables, and all of the such. So thank you very much. That's about all I got.
Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate you being here and presenting. The next three, one will be from Alan Davis, who is from the Utah Golf Course Superintendents Association. That will be a video that he has recorded for us since he was not able to attend. And then there will be two statements that I will read, and I'll tell you who they are from as we get into that. So now, if we could, hopefully we can get the video to play from Alan.
My name is Alan Davis. I'm the golf course superintendent of Willow Creek Country Club, past UGCSA, Utah Golf Course Superintendents Association president, and currently serving my term as past president. Thank you very much for your interest in learning more about the importance of Japanese beetle control in Utah. This is a very important topic as we are still in the stage, if diligent efforts are put forth, control of this pest is still possible. I applaud the Utah Department of Agriculture for being proactive in their monitoring and reacting to keep this pest from becoming a major problem in Utah. Being from the East, I have seen firsthand the extensive damage that can occur if this pest is allowed to persist. I'd like to briefly discuss the damage that can occur on golf courses specifically from this pest. Japanese beetle can cause damage to all plant life found on a golf course. As they develop from grub to beetle, they will cycle from feeding on the roots of turf grass to defoliating plants and trees. As grubs, for those of you unfamiliar, think of this as the stages when they're children, when they're young. They will feed and develop on the roots of turf grass, subsurface. You don't see the pest. This is a major problem since by the time damage is observed on the surface, the area affected is much larger than it appears. The turf grass does not reflect the damage until it is under stress, which of course is in the height of the golf season here in Utah. The damage can be extensive and, like I previously said, is not noticed until it's too late. As adults, Japanese beetles turn their attention from turf to plant species above the ground. Japanese beetles are serious pests of more than 300 plant species. Flowers, trees, shrubs, fruits, vegetables, and field crops can be affected. Japanese beetles feed on the leaves, consuming the leaf tissue between the veins. It leaves a skeleton-like appearance. Young trees, flowers, fruits, and vegetables are particularly vulnerable. On a golf course in Utah, we have many planted tree varieties that, while they do well in our environment, are non-native. That being said, there is a focus in our industry of replacing older trees with new continually. While most mature trees can survive the damage, younger ones typically cannot. We must be diligent in our control of the pest to ensure future generations of trees will flourish just as past generations have. In summary, I believe this initiative is important for the future of plant life in Utah. Japanese beetle is highly invasive and left untreated will change our environment permanently. Moving forward at this stage with treatments is much less expensive and highly effective due to the low population numbers. Thank you very much for your time and interest. Hi there, my name is Alan Davis.
All right, thank you, Jared. So I do have a couple of letters of support to read. The first one is from Bruce Cox, who is the Parks and Recreation Director for Centerville City. He writes, as the Parks and Recreation Director for Centerville City, I support the scientists of the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food in this effort to eradicate the Japanese beetle before it can become established in our community and state. I want to thank the department for the great work they have done in both monitoring and identifying the problem early while it can be treated and resolved before it grows into an infestation that is too big to do anything about. I would also like to thank them for partnering with local agencies and securing funding for the eradication so the costs do not have to fall on the local municipalities and residents. The already successful eradication projects that took place in Orem, Utah, and Boise, Idaho gives me confidence that this project in Davis County will be a success also. Signed, Bruce Cox. The other one is from Katie Wagner, who is a extension horticulture faculty with USU Extension in Salt Lake County. She writes, Utah State University Extension provides horticulture outreach to the citizens of Utah. We disseminate research-based, non-biased information and resources throughout the state. Many homeowners and farmers grow plants that are highly susceptible to feeding damage from the Japanese beetle, such as grapes, roses, turf, peaches, cherries, apples, and raspberries. An infestation of this pest would adversely impact many landowners and businesses in Utah. Places with severe risk of damage include yards and gardens, public spaces like parks, nurseries, golf courses, and farms. So we have all those read in. We do then also have a video from some folks at Westminster College that did an economic impact analysis for us on the impacts of Japanese beetle, the potentials. So we will have that video now, and then we'll go from there.
Utah is one of the few states that is currently Japanese beetle free, being neither partially nor generally infested, though it was at risk for infestation in 2006 when a Japanese beetle population was discovered in Orem, Utah. In collaboration with the city of Orem, the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food decided to take on an eradication effort unprecedented in size to rid the state of Japanese beetle. By 2011, not a single Japanese beetle was found, and 3 years later it was declared eradicated. Since that time, the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food has maintained a quarantine against Japanese beetle, costing about $60,000 annually. At the request of the department, our study seeks to answer the question if the potential impacts of the Japanese beetle on Utah agriculture warrant this continued expense. Though the Japanese beetle does pose a threat to all of Utah agriculture with its large list of potential host plants, due to time and data constraints, we have focused our efforts on calculating the impact to corn and turf grass in Utah.
Let's break down what we chose to include in calculating the costs and the benefits of the decision for Utah to maintain the quarantine or not. The estimated cost of quarantine is based on expenses reported by the Utah Department of Agriculture on the current annual cost to control the Japanese beetle population. The benefits are then broken into corn and turf. The benefit of corn is measured by the forecasted losses in corn revenue if Utah doesn't control the Japanese beetle population. And the turf benefit is calculated from the cost to replace existing turf in Utah that the Japanese beetle could destroy if quarantine is not maintained. So, if the costs are greater than the benefit, Utah Agricultural Department should not continue to quarantine. If the costs are less than the benefit, the Utah Agricultural Department should continue to quarantine.
Yield of corn was forecast through 2027 to allow adequate time for a Japanese beetle population of significant size to establish itself in Utah. Forecasting was done using two methods. First, using statistical regression to produce the equation displayed, and second, using a weighted historical growth model, which derived weighted growth rates from 25 years of historical data. The most conservative estimates from both methods of forecasting were weighted together to forecast 2027 Utah corn yield at 6,992,812 bushels. Using the most recent price of $4.50 from the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food's 2019 Utah Agricultural Statistics and Annual Summary Report, this yield equates to a value of $31,467,654. The worst case scenario of losses to corn is based upon a 10 bushels per acre loss obtained from another study. We have also included a moderate and best case scenario at losses of 8 bushels and 6 bushels respectively. The worst case scenario at a loss of 10 bushels per acre equates to losses of $2,132,995. At 8 bushels, $1,706,396. And at 6 bushels, $1,279,797.
We used an ArcGIS data sheet that contained land use in the state of Utah for each county. We then transferred the data to Excel and eliminated areas that didn't fit requirements for the Japanese beetle to survive, such as temperature, soil moisture, and land topography. We specifically looked at urban areas in Utah with turf and eliminated areas without irrigation methods. This left areas with sprinkler irrigation methods. Then we'd gathered average temperatures for each county for June, July, and August. For each county outside the survival range of 59 degrees to 88 degrees, we calculated a discount rate so that counties with temperatures further outside the temperature range use a smaller percentage of the square meters of turf which indicates that less land will be invaded by the Japanese beetle. As you can see, we also applied another discount rate to indicate best, most likely, and worst case scenarios. A discount rate to every county of 80% for our best case scenario means we only expect about 20% of the turf to be damaged, or 20% of the total turf to be occupied by the Japanese beetle. We did this because the Japanese beetle tends to aggregate in small areas, and this also allows us to create different scenarios of expected damage. The cost of damage is then calculated by taking the square feet multiplied by the cost of turf replacement at 69 cents per square foot. Let's break down what we chose to include in calculating the costs and the benefits of the decision for Utah to maintain the quarantine or not. The estimated cost of quarantine is based on expenses reported by the Utah Department of Agriculture on the current annual cost to control the Japanese beetle population. The benefits are then broken into corn and turf. The benefit of corn is measured by the forecasted losses in corn revenue if Utah doesn't control the Japanese beetle population. And the turf benefit is calculated from the cost to replace existing turf in Utah that the Japanese beetle could destroy if quarantine is not maintained. So, if the costs are greater than the benefit, Utah Agricultural Department should not continue to quarantine. If the costs are less than the benefit, the Utah Agricultural Department should continue to quarantine.
Based upon our findings of the accumulated annual cost of maintaining the quarantine representing less than 1% of only a fraction of the potential losses to Utah agriculture, we recommend the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food continue to maintain the quarantine against Japanese beetle.
Thank you, Jared, for sharing that. As you can see, it certainly would have very large economic impacts to the citizens of the state of Utah, especially when you consider there's more than 300 plant species that it would feed on, and we've selected 2 to analyze. So the numbers, the devastation in the state is astronomical, and it's something that we certainly would like to control. We're hoping that as we do so, overall, we will have less pesticides introduced into the environment, because homeowners won't have to do that to control and to protect their turf and their plants, as well as our agricultural producers will not have to treat nearly as much either to control these pests. So now we've come to the end of our presentation portions. Chris, is there anything you would like to do before we go to resident and stakeholder questions and comments?
No, I think that we have concluded everything, and we'll just move forward with comments, questions, and provide answers.
Okay, very good. Caroline, do we have anything on Facebook that we need to address? Any questions or comments?
None so far.
Okay. We will give it a little bit longer, just in case somebody is kind of formulating a question that they would like to ask or anything like that. So we will wait patiently for that, and then if you send something to us when we get it, when we have it, Caroline, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, Caroline, did anything come in?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Instead of just sitting here waiting, we will end our open house here, the virtual open house. We will post some stuff again on the department's, all their social media outlets, and give people a chance to be, give people a chance to comment there, as well as we will post it so they can send it to the insect email page. So that way it'll go to all of the department employees who are on that list. So thank you again for all of you that participated today, and for those who listened in. We hope you found it informative and helpful. We look forward to these efforts this year and continuing to make a big impact on protecting the state of Utah as we go forward. So I'd like to thank you all again for your participation, and we'll see you all later. Thank you.